Do you think 16-year-olds should have the vote, Matt Goodwin?
No, I don't, no. I think, for lots of reasons, but I don't think they're developed enough intellectually, emotionally. I don't think they are paying tax. I don't think they're in the conversation as much as others. I don't think they have enough responsibility to be making some of those decisions. I also think this is pretty clearly a naked power grab on the part of Labour to basically rewire the constitutional arrangements in this country to give votes to 16-year-olds, to give votes to potentially EU nationals, to rewire the system in a way that makes it much more pro-Labour. So I don't support votes for 16.
Do you support that?
I do. I thought about it carefully. In Scotland, 16-year-olds can vote. And I thought, well, what else can you do when you're 16? You can. You talk about paying taxes. You can, at 16, get a job, and therefore, when you earn money, you pay taxes. And I think if you pay taxes, you have an absolute right to know where your money in taxes is going to go and how it's going to be spent and how your world and the world that country that you live in is run. I think it's valid. If you can get married, if you're emotionally, I understand a young person doesn't have experience. You can be reckless. You can be all sorts of things when you're a teenager. But at the same time, as I said earlier, if compulsory voting was part of the system as it is in Australia, it means that you engage from an early age with politics, and you understand how things work, and it does make you think. And even if you don't want to vote and you have to go along because otherwise you'll be fined, you can spoil your vote and not vote. That's absolutely up to you. But it means that you have to think about the system.
So I think compulsory voting is slightly different from votes for 16.
Yes, I understand. I'm sorry I brought that in.
I think also when you look at 18 to 24-year-olds in this country, their turnout rates are actually very low. They're about 30 points less likely than baby boomers to vote. So I don't see this mass sort of swell of enthusiasm among younger voters to participate in the system. I also don't see much polling evidence that most Brits want 16-year-olds to have the vote. I also think about myself at 16. I mean, did I really know enough about the world and have enough experience to actually really cast a vote in a general election? No, I didn't really, not at all.
But you're old enough to have a child, which is the most...
Well, I hope...
if you're 16, you're legally old enough to have a child, and that's the biggest responsibility you can have, to bring another life into this world and to be a parent.
Sure, but we're talking about extremely low numbers of people.
I know low numbers, but if legally you're allowed to do that, then how come legally you are not allowed to sort of...
And I also, it's not surprised that many people on the left do want to put this in, because the vast majority of young people, teenagers and so on, as we know, the age divide is the biggest divide of all in British politics at the moment, that the young are much more likely to vote Labour than Conservative. Only 8% of Zoomers from Gen Z are planning to vote Conservative at this election. So it's no surprise that people on the left want votes for 16-year-olds. But as I say, I don't think it's the way forward.
Well, a couple of my viewers have got in touch with the same suggestion you're saying. It should actually be raised to 21. What do you think to that?
I mean, I can understand the reasoning behind it. I think 18 for me is a good enough reason. I mean, it's a good enough age. Sorry, I'm not entirely convinced by the need to raise it. I am more won over by the case for compulsory voting, so long as it includes the option of none of the above.
Yes.
Because I think if this election on July the 4th had that option on the ballot and people were able to go into the polling stations and say, I don't like Sunak and I don't like Starmer and I don't like anybody on offer, I reckon that none of the above, you know, a party would probably end up doing rather well.
I know, but I'm so opposed to this. I'm in complete disagreement with both of you. I think the job of a politician is to engage people. The job of politics is to be inspiring, engaging, accessible, but also for people to follow through on what they actually promise that they are going to deliver. That's how you engage and inspire people. What you don't do is, if the only way you can get a turnout or a decent-sized turnout is to force people, either by, I don't know, sanctions or taking money out of your pocket or whatever, you don't have engagement. If you force me to vote, I'm not engaged with you. If anything, I'm more disconnected and resentful of you. I know how to put across in a box. I don't need to be educated and taught, but it's not, I think it's so kind of counter-intuitive to me. You know, will increase engagement by forcing people. You increase engagement by having decent politicians.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Properly.
But I agree. But the thing is, if you know you've got to vote, and this is experience from Australia, and, you know, even it's two blokes down the pub saying, oh, I've got to vote tomorrow, you might have a conversation about who to vote for, where you might not have had that before. And it's just, I think more people should know more. Knowledge is power.
But you're assuming that people don't vote because they're a bit thick and they don't know.
No, not thick, that just not engaged. They don't understand that their voice matters, that without that, they don't have to take a responsibility to say, well, this is what I think, this is what I'd like.
Voice doesn't matter. I mean, I can think of areas where you could literally put a tin of baked beans up for election with a Labour lanyard on and it's going to win.
Well, that's irrelevant. The fact of the matter but it's taking part in life. It's part of life. It's engaging in life.
I mean, so to go back to the case of the tin of baked beans, which, you know, I would consider voting for, given the current political class.
Larry the cat.
But that's also about electoral reform, isn't it? I mean, do we move away from first past the post to proportional representation? Because we've now got, I think the Electoral Reform Society say we've got more sort of safe seats, you know, wasted areas, essentially, where people's votes aren't making any difference at all, than we've had in a very, very long time. So is it now the case? I mean, if we end up with a hung parliament, this is where it gets interesting. Let's say Labour falls short of a majority. Let's say the polls are wrong. Let's say the local elections were right. Let's say Labour's only 8 or 9 points ahead. And suddenly they haven't got a majority and we're in hung parliament territory. Is that when the Lib Dems, the SNP and the Greens and Reform all say, right, we want PR, we want a change to the election system in this country, and will Labour get knocked into doing something around that? That's where this could get quite interesting.
So you would get one of those to push for at least a referendum on PR as part of their kind of deal of doing a coalition or something with them?
Some kind of constitutional shake-up. We've got House of Lords reform on the agenda. We've got more devolution on the agenda with a Labour government. We've got the Gordon Brown proposals. We've got potentially votes for 16. As I say, I don't agree with that. If we get a very tight race and suddenly a sort of awkward coalition of a few parties, a Labour-led government, does Labour get pushed into actually, you know, giving reform for the
I would like to see proportional representation because it's a fairer system. It is not as cut and dried, and then you run the risk of, you know, things splintering. But it is much fairer. It seems so completely unfair. I mean, the vote for the Liberal Democrats last time was far greater than the actual number of MPs that the vote produced.
I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, if you look at the studies of PR, they show that it produces more left-wing governments over the longer term than right-wing governments. But also, if we have PR, you know, Reform would probably have 20 or 40 seats in the House of Commons. Labour would probably split into 2 parties. We'd certainly get more of a representative politics.
Well, in a minute after the break, I want to pick up on this, like the Israel-Gaza conflict on the streets of Britain. There's a cinema in London, and I want to talk about that, so I'll come to that in a minute. But George Galloway's party, they've not really had much of a mention. The Workers' Party of Great Britain, I mean, they are saying that they're expecting 150,000 votes minimum, I think it is. They're contesting a huge number of seats, and they would say that they very much feel that they're going to make a massive indent into the Labour vote as well. Do you share that optimism or not?
I think they will attract a significant number of votes, actually, and mainly Muslim seats. I don't think they're going to win many, if any, seats beyond what they've got because they haven't got 10, 20 George Galloways. They're a threat in the sense of they're a sort of a canary in the coal mine. If the Middle East continues to intensify, continues to erupt, this could become a serious problem for all centre-left parties. The Democrats in November too. Joe Biden's having some really big problems over this as he goes into that fight with Donald Trump. I have seen numbers that suggest even on a perfect day for George Galloway and his party, they could win maybe, you know, a dozen or so seats. Now, in a context with a massive Labour majority, obviously Labour can absorb those kinds of
Let me ask you very quickly before I just go to this break, because you are the politics guru. Reform, Nigel, obviously not standing down. What impact will that have in your mind?
If he's actively campaigning, if he's in the media every day, if he's on the ground, if voters are seeing him campaign, Nigel's always going to make a difference. He's that kind of figure, particularly given how, I would argue, bland and similar the rest of the political class are. Never underestimate the impact Nigel Farage will have on British politics.
One of my viewers says, please can you ask Nina, was Shamima Begum old enough to know what she was doing, age 16?
She was at the age of 16, but I think she wasn't quite 16. She was younger than that, wasn't she?
Well, she was 16 as the age of focus when a lot of the stuff was going on.
When she actually went, I think she was younger than that. I think she was 15.
But was she old enough to know her own mind and what she was doing?
At 16, I think you do.
There you go. Paul says, Michelle, be absolutely straight about things. Many 16-year-olds don't even seem to know what gender they are, never mind who to vote for. Karen says, 16-year-olds are way too young to vote. If I'd have voted at that age, I would have just followed my parents. Again, I've told you that other people are saying that ultimately it should be 21. Someone else here says, if 16-year-olds are considered old enough to vote, they should also be able to face the full force of the law. You can't have anyone in society that should have rights without responsibilities.